15 minutes for each session, including time for questions and comments between the sessions. We have 1 5-minute break scheduled as well. Again, put your questions and comments in the chat function. Our moderator will read them to the presenters. We recommend that you note the slide number. If you have a question on a particular slide, note that slide number in the chat function when you're asking your question. And at the end of this session, we'll be creating a question and answer document. Hopefully we'll be able to get to all the questions. We may not be able to, but we can assure you that we will answer them all. And we'll email that document to everybody who's attended today. Also, please note this session today is being recorded. Okay, so the purpose of today's session is to go into a bit more detail on the new technical criteria found in the 2020 accounting document. And because our time is limited, we're going to hold questions specific to broader issues such as grandfathering to the end of the session. If we don't get to them all, again, we'll provide you answers in a document. We may end up doing a follow-up session if necessary. So you should see at the bottom of this slide, and hopefully now in the chat box, a link to the 2020 document that we will be discussing today. I think that was also emailed out to everybody maybe yesterday. Please use this document as we go through the presentations if you can. In some instances, a presenter will refer you to a particular page or table in the document, so that'll be helpful. The 2020 accounting document was developed by the Water and Science Administration's Sediment, Stormwater, and Dam Safety Program and the Integrated Watershed Planning Program, with contributions from you all, the MS4 jurisdictions, also from non-governmental organizations and other state agencies and EPA. As you all know, in early 2019, MDE held a number of work group meetings with the MS4s, NGOs, and EPA representatives to discuss accounting for new BMPs and crediting co-benefits. The results of these work group sessions and many other discussions with MS4s over a 2-year period led to the completion of the first draft of the 2020 document in 2019. The draft was sent out to you all, EPA, the NGOs for review and comment, and we provided, I believe we provided a presentation, held numerous discussions, email exchanges, and meetings to answer questions and comments received from the reviewers. MDE, to the best of our ability, incorporated the results of these discussions into this final 2020 document. However, since its publication, we have received additional questions from the MS4 jurisdictions and the NGOs, and today we hope to address as many of these questions as possible, as well as any new questions that arise during this session. The goal is, of course, to reach a common understanding of how to use the document to meet your NPDES MS4 permits. The 2020 accounting document is long and complex, and in many instances not easy to understand. However, it is an important document that helps ensure consistency in reporting restoration progress towards achieving water quality for the citizens of Maryland and the Chesapeake Bay. Today's presentations assume you, the audience, have some background in the NPDES MS4 permits and the impervious surface restoration requirement and the 2014 guidance document. We have anticipated that there are a variety of levels of familiarity with the technical aspects of both documents. Today's webinar reflects contributions, again, from both the Integrated Watershed Planning Program and the Sediment, Stormwater, and Dam Safety Program. This slide here includes today's agenda. We will start with a brief discussion of upland BMPs, followed by a discussion about what's new in the document, the 2020 accounting document, including a discussion of the Phase 6 model numbers and unit loads, and new and updated alternative practices. We'll follow those discussions with a brief discussion on nutrient trading, and then calculating co-benefits and reporting those requirements into the geodatabase. And again, finally, we'll wrap up with a discussion on additional policy questions. Your speakers today are Stuart Comstock, who is the Division Chief for the Program Review Division of the Sediment, Stormwater, and Dam Safety Program. Sophia Grossweiler is a Regulatory and Compliance Engineer in the Watershed Restoration Division of the Integrated Watershed Planning Program. Christina Lyerly is a natural resources planner in the Program Review Division of the Sediment, Stormwater, and Dam Safety Program. Shannon McHenrick is a natural resources planner in the Watershed Restoration Division of the Integrated Watershed Planning Program. Nora Howard is a natural resources planner in the Program Review Division of the Sediment, Stormwater, and Dam Safety Program. And Michelle Crawford is a natural resources planner in the Program Review Division of the Sediment, Stormwater, and Dam Safety Program. And today's moderator is Ray Barr, our Deputy Program Manager for the Sediment, Stormwater, and Dam Safety Program. I would personally like to thank each of these speakers today for their time putting these presentations together. This is some very difficult and technical subject matter to explain and present, and they have worked very hard to make it as clear and understandable as possible. Again, as I stated previously, larger policy issues and permit questions such as grandfathering will be held to the last session. And I believe I'm going to turn this over now to our first presenter, Stuart Comstock.
Your presentation is showing.
No, it's not mine yet. Give me a second.
Okay, very good.
Now I'm showing. Thank you, Ray. Good morning or good afternoon, all. I have the enviable task of talking about what hasn't changed in the 2020 accounting guidance. I just want to thank ahead of time the rest of the staff who have worked this out today. They're going to make the rest of this look easy. Okay, so the 2020 accounting guidance, it's part of the permit. It's actually listed in part 4.E.3, where we say that the permittee shall commence and complete the restoration of X amount of acres implementing stormwater BMPs, initiatives, or alternative control practices in accordance with the 2020 accounting guidance. It reflects the Phase 3 watershed implementation plan for the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. It incorporates the Phase 6 Chesapeake Bay watershed model, including any new and updated BMPs and co-benefits. And for the purposes of reissued permits, it supersedes the 2014 guidance. As we go through the presentations today, we'll be using a lot of commonly used acronyms. These are found on pages 37 and 38 of the accounting guidance document. I list here a number of the newer ones, including ED, which is extended detention, EIA, which is equivalent impervious acres, EOS or EOT, which is edge of stream or edge of tide, GSI, green stormwater infrastructure. You're going to hear us use I-F. You're going to hear it, which is the aggregate unit impervious unit load. PE is an effective rainfall treated by a practice. We'll talk about STB, stream bed and bank load. We'll talk about an ST 1-inch delta. Finally, we'll talk about watershed management, water quality treatment, and water quality volumes. When we talk about the restoration credits and accounting principles, imperviousness is still the MS4 permit surrogate for measuring level of implementation. The impervious acre credit is used for upland BMPs. In this effect, the Chapter 3 or Chapter 5 BMPs of the design manual. And it is determined by three variables: drainage area, impervious area, and rainfall treated. As in the 2014 guidance, impervious acres are 100% treated when the runoff from 1 inch of rainfall or the water quality volume is captured and treated. With respect to alternative practices, we use the equivalent impervious acres. Alternative BMPs include the ones listed here, and we'll talk more about those later. And the 2020 accounting guidance includes guidance for calculating equivalent impervious acres and pollutant load reductions. Again, these will be discussed in more depth as we move forward today. So I'm here to talk about impervious acre credits for upland BMPs. Upland BMPs are those practices that meet the water quality criteria, the WQV, and design standards in the design manual. Chesapeake Bay program recognizes two categories of upland BMPs: runoff reduction or stormwater treatment practices. For restoration and impervious acre crediting, rainfall treated may be less than 1 inch. And this is an important change. In the 2020 accounting guidance, the rainfall depth captured is noted as the effective rainfall, or PE. However, the volume of runoff that is captured and treated is referred to as the water quality treatment volume, or WQT. This is to keep it separate from the water quality volume found in the design manual. Here's a listing of all of the upland BMPs found in the accounting guides. Please note that under filtering systems, bioretention is listed as a runoff reduction practice for the purposes of pollutant load removal efficiencies. However, for impervious acre credits, it is still considered to be an STBMP. We'll talk about that later. Also, please note that dry channel regenerative step pool conveyance systems are considered a stormwater retrofit by the Chesapeake Bay program. And you'll see a note accordingly down at the bottom of this chart, which is table 2, found on page 7 of the accounting guidance. This may look familiar because it hasn't changed from the 2014 guidance. The impervious acre credit for a structural practice is the rainfall depth treated over 1 inch up to a rainfall, or PE, depth of 1 inch of rainfall. So if I have 10 impervious acres and I treat 1 inch of rainfall, I get 10 impervious acre credit. Likewise, if I have 10 impervious acres and I only treat half an inch of rainfall, I only get 5 impervious acres of credit. Again, this has not changed. Similarly, the way we assess non-structural practices and alternatives found on pages 4 and 5 of the accounting guidance has also not changed. So if you disconnect 10 impervious acres 100%, you get 10 impervious acres credit. However, if you only disconnect 10 acres 50%, you only get 5 impervious acres credit. Also, a holdover from the 2014 accounting guidance is this impervious acre credit for redevelopment. So you get a percent of existing untreated impervious acres treated for water quality through redevelopment, and that's your impervious acre restoration. So if you have 10 existing untreated impervious acres and you treat 50% of those, you would get 5 impervious acre credit. However, if you treat 100% of those, you would get 10 impervious acres of credit. Again, this is unchanged from the 2014 guidance. I'm just going to briefly cover this because these will be covered in more depth shortly. Pollutant load reductions for upland BMPs are based on the removal efficiencies recommended by the Chesapeake Bay program. They are determined using the adjuster curves found in the publications from 2012 and 2015. They are applied to the appropriate urban land cover unit loads that are found in table 4 of the accounting guidance. And they are affected by the phase 6 model segment delivery factors. Again, some of this will be covered in the next presentation. And here's table 3, which is found on page 8 of the accounting guidance that talks about the pollutant removal efficiencies that may be applied to upland BMPs. Please note the 3 values at the bottom of the table highlighted in yellow. The Chesapeake Bay program charts only go up to 2.5 inches. However, for the purposes of the accounting guidance, we have extended those charts up to 3 inches. Are there any questions at this point?
Again, if you have any questions, thanks, Stu. That was very good. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Carl did ask if we're going to make these slide presentations available after the meeting. Yes, we will, and we're actually recording it as well, and we'll try to get that up on our webpage. So seeing no further questions, Sophia, if you would like to go ahead and put your presentation up now, go ahead.
Sure. 1 second. Can you see my screen?
Sophia, I can hear you and I can see your presentation, so go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Ray. Hi, everybody. My name is Sophia Grossweiler, and I work in the Integrated Water Planning Program. And I will begin the portion of the presentation that discusses what has changed in the accounting guidance document. So first off, pollutant loading rates have changed and are now determined using 2010 no action scenario phase 6 edge of stream loading rates taken directly from CAS with the addition of a disaggregated stream bed and bank load, which we refer to as STB load. Disaggregating the stream load and applying it back to each load source allows us to remain consistent with the phase 5 Chesapeake Bay model, which had STB load baked into each load source rather than calculated separately. Table 4 shown here is taken directly from the accounting guidance document and summarizes all edge of stream unit loads necessary to perform any of the calculations described in the document. So for example, to calculate the aggregate impervious total nitrogen unit load, the disaggregated stream bed and bank TN load is added to the 2010 no action edge of stream TN load from CAS to give you the total TN load, which, as you can see, is what's listed in table 4. The mixed open and the tree canopy unit loads are an exception to the unit load calculation method previously described, and those are based on a percent removal efficiency outlined in the expert panel on conservation landscaping and urban tree canopy expansion. We determined that these BMP efficiencies more accurately estimated these load source loading rates than the raw model output. So more information about that. So this table is taken directly from the expert panel on conservation landscaping and outlines the percent removal efficiencies used to determine the mixed open unit load in the accounting guidance document. For example, to calculate the mixed open total nitrogen unit load, you would apply the TN percent removal efficiency to the turf total TN load listed in table 4, and then that gives you your total mixed open TN unit load. And for the tree canopy calculations, this table is taken directly from the expert panel on urban tree canopy expansion and outlines the percent removal efficiencies used to determine the tree canopy unit loads. So for example, to calculate the tree canopy over turf total nitrogen unit load, you would apply the total nitrogen percent removal efficiency to the turf total nitrogen unit load. To disaggregate the stream bed and bank load, we followed a method provided by Olivia Devereaux, which was also presented at a previous MACO meeting and is detailed in Appendix E of the accounting guidance document. This process has already been done for you, and I'm only mentioning it here for transparency purposes, and you're not required to perform these calculations. But equation 17 in the accounting guidance document outlines the foundational formulas for calculating the stream bed and bank load using this method, and requires 3 main input variables. First, your CAS scenario edge of stream without STB load, a calibrated edge of stream without STB load, and then an STB base load. The TSS STB load formula also requires an additional 4/3 times impervious TSS load. So this is a very, very basic overview of the method, but for the sake of time and clarity, these are the 3 basic components of STB disaggregation. So first, you would use the equation 17 formulas to calculate each pollutant's STB load. You would determine a series of normalization ratios and then apply those back to your calculated STB load, which would ultimately result in your normalized disaggregated STB load. So again, for more detailed information on this method, please see Appendix E in the accounting guidance document. But again, this process has already been done for you and you don't have to reproduce it. Appendix D details the methodology for calculating equivalent impervious acre credit, which has changed slightly since the last accounting guidance document. Equivalent impervious acre credit is determined by applying equivalent impervious acre conversion factors, or EIAF, directly to the units of a BMP type. These factors are calculated using phase 6 Chesapeake Bay watershed model loading rates and have a variable formula dependent on whether the BMP type is an alternative or a land cover change BMP. The alternative and land cover change BMPs are defined in the accounting guidance document, but I'll also just go ahead and list them here. And it's not that short of a list, so please bear with me. Alternative BMPs include street sweeping, storm drain cleaning, floating treatment wetlands, urban soil restoration, septic practices, shoreline management, stream restoration, and elimination of discovered nutrient discharges from gray infrastructure. Technically, land cover change BMPs are also a subset of alternative BMPs, but they are an exception in this case. So for alternative BMPs, the EIA calculation is based on the difference between pollutant loads from aggregate impervious and true forest land covers. Land cover change BMPs include forest planting, riparian forest planting, conservation landscaping, riparian conservation landscaping, forest conservation, impervious surface reduction, street trees, and urban tree canopy planting. These, the EIA calculation for land cover change BMPs is based on a stormwater treatment to 1 inch, or ST1 inch delta, as it's referred to in the accounting guidance document, in order to make those comparable to structural practices. Considering a change in land cover as a change in hydrology, we chose to use the efficiency of stormwater treatment to 1 inch applied to impervious to calculate EIA credit for these practices. So Table 1 in the accounting guidance document outlines each BMP type mentioned in the document and their respective load reductions and equivalent impervious acre conversion factors. All load reductions and conversion factors have been calculated for you, so this would be your go-to table if you're trying to calculate your equivalent impervious acre credit. Appendix C outlines the load reduction formulas and pollutant removal efficiencies used to populate this table, if you're wondering. So Table 5 and Equation 5 in the accounting guidance document outline the process for determining an alternative BMP type's equivalent impervious acre factor. Table 5 shows how the impervious forest deltas are calculated. It's just the difference between aggregate impervious unit load and true forest unit load. And then these deltas are then substituted into Equation 5, dividing each pollutant load reduction, and then the results of which are averaged, giving you the conversion factor. So for example, if I wanted to check that the equivalent impervious acre conversion factor calculation in Table 1 was correct for an advanced street sweeping practice of 1 pass every 12 weeks, I would input the load reduction information listed in Table 1 into Equation 5, which gives me, as you see here, 0.027, matching what's in Table 1. So this is just an example of what we've already done for you. Taking this example further, this example that's shown here is also taken directly from the accounting guidance document from Appendix F, which provides examples of calculating equivalent impervious acre credits for alternative BMPs. So to calculate my equivalent impervious acre credit for a street sweeping practice, I would need to multiply the number of miles swept by my equivalent impervious acre conversion factor. So in this example, it says that a jurisdiction is using advanced sweeping technology and sweeping 100 lane miles once every 12 weeks. So I'd go to Table 1 in the accounting guidance document, find what advanced sweeping practice that is and the conversion factor for it, and I would multiply that conversion factor, which is 0.027 in this case, by the number of lane miles swept, so 100 lane miles, and receive 2.7 equivalent impervious acres credit. So for a land cover change BMP, Table 23 and Equation 16 in the accounting guidance document outline the process for determining this BMP type's equivalent impervious acre conversion factor. Table 23 shows how our ST1 inch deltas are calculated. So multiplying our total impervious unit load by an ST1 inch pollutant removal efficiency. These deltas are then substituted into Equation 16, which, as you can tell, is almost identical to Equation 5, except that it uses the ST1 inch delta to replace the impervious forest delta. So for example, if I wanted to check that the equivalent impervious acre conversion factor in Table 1 for a forest planting practice was correct, I would input the load reduction information listed in Table 1 into Equation 16, giving me 1.10, matching what's in the table. Taking this example further, also this example is taken from Appendix F as well. To calculate my equivalent impervious acre credit, I would multiply the number of acres I converted into forest by my conversion factor. So it says here that I'm planning to implement a forest planting BMP and convert 100 acres of turf to forest. So I go to table 1, look at what the conversion factor is for forest planting, which is 1.10, which we also calculated, and then multiply that factor by the number of converted acres, so 100, giving me 110 equivalent impervious acres credit. That was a lot. Are there any questions?
Sophia, that was great. Not seeing any questions right now in the chat box. Please remember to put any questions into the chat box. Also, if you are not presenting, please mute your mic and turn your video off. We're trying to save bandwidth here to make sure that all the presentations go through smoothly. So with that, seeing Christina, if you want to go ahead and put your presentation up. Again, thanks, Sophia. That was great.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, Christina, I can hear you and I can see your presentation.
Okay, great. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Christina Larley, and I work in the Sediment, Stormwater, and Dam Safety Program. Shannon McHenrick works in the Integrated Water Planning Program, and together we'll review BMPs that are new or updated since the 2014 accounting guidance. We will briefly detail some of the major changes. This presentation is focused on the technical criteria and calculations of the accounting guidance, and will not address questions on grandfathering or permit requirements. As previously mentioned, Stu will review policies in a separate presentation toward the end of this training, so please hold those questions until then. Table 1 of the accounting guidance is a comprehensive list of alternative BMPs, their efficiencies, and the equivalent impervious acre, or EIA, conversion factors. This slide is meant to be a reminder that Table 1 is a quick reference for EIA crediting. For a version easier to read, you can find this table on pages 2 and 3 of the guidance. If you would like to follow along, the table and page numbers throughout this presentation correspond to those in the June 2020 accounting guidance released with tentative determination. The updated expert panel report provides considerably more options regarding the street sweeping frequencies MS4s can report and get credit for. Tonnage can no longer be used to calculate an EIA. The expert panel determined that only a fraction of the solids picked up by sweepers would make it to the bay, and the windslam model is more technically and empirically based. The hopper method was prone to errors. Curb lane miles swept are reported and represent one side of the street. When cleaning parking lots, 1 acre swept using advanced street sweeping technology is the equivalent of 1 curb lane mile. Roads and parking lots without curbs and gutters do not get credit because the expert panel determined that they may create a net source of sediment if the adjacent pervious area is dislodged by the sweeper brush. Regenerative or vacuum street sweeping is referred to in the expert panel report as advanced sweeping technology, but the BMP code will remain VSS for the purposes of MS4 reporting. For the storm drain cleaning BMP, there are different efficiencies and EIA factors for organic and inorganic material. MS4s can use their own process to best estimate the makeup of the material collected by storm drain cleaning. These can be reported either separately or as one by choosing the dominant material. These BMP efficiencies apply to what the geodatabase's BMP codes refer to as catch basin cleaning and storm drain vacuuming. This is still an annual BMP that is averaged over the 5-year permit term. The expert panel determined the pollutant removal rates for floating treatment wetlands based on the percent of pond wet surface area that they cover, as measured at the design permanent pool elevation. It is limited to between 10 and 50% coverage and is reported as a separate BMP from the pond. The equivalent impervious acre is simply the number of impervious acres in the pond's drainage area multiplied by the appropriate load reduction found in this table. As an example, there is a pond that has a rainfall depth treated of a ½ inch. There are 30 acres of impervious area draining to this BMP. As discussed by Stu earlier in the presentation, treating a ½ inch of rainfall provides treatment for half of the impervious acres draining to the practice. This pond would be entered as a BMP in the database as PWET. The 15 treated acres would be captured there. A floating treatment wetland is installed and in the pond. It covers 15% of the wet surface area. So according to this table, it would have an EIA factor of 0.017 per impervious acre in the drainage area. The EIA would be multiplied by 30 acres for an equivalent impervious acre restoration of 0.51 acres. This practice and EIA credit is reported separately as an alternative BMP with its own BMP code XFTW. The default rate can no longer be used for stream restorations or outfall stabilization to be consistent with the expert panel report, which determined that individual site-level data collection is critical to improving the accuracy and consistency of calculations. The 0.02 EIA per linear foot can only be used as a planning rate. Final load reductions and equivalent impervious acres achieved can only be reported if the project is complete and all necessary site-specific data are collected. The Chesapeake Bay program approved updated methodologies for protocols 1, 2, and 3. The work groups recommended that these go into effect on July 1, 2021. The new protocol calculation memo includes a provision for Maryland to develop a state-specific treatable floodplain volume for Protocol 3. MDE will be looking into the research and technical justification to develop an allowable volume. This work will be completed by final determination. A new BMP is the elimination of discovered nutrient discharges from gray infrastructure. What is unique about this BMP is that it has a maximum EIA credit that an MS4 can claim in a permit term. The CBP's Watershed Technical Work Group recommended a cap for nutrient reductions if the gray infrastructure loads were not explicitly simulated in the Phase 6 model. These loads were not simulated, but the expert panel has not reconvened to develop this cap. Because the protocols allow default values to varying extents, and this is a new BMP that has mostly not been utilized, MDE took a conservative approach and followed CBP's recommendation. The maximum credit applies only to the EIA. There is no maximum for load reductions reported for TMDL progress. The maximum is based on two assumptions provided in the expert panel report. First, nutrient discharges from gray infrastructure potentially contribute 20% of the dry weather load. And second, the dry weather load is 20% of the total annual nitrogen and phosphorus discharged from urban pervious land. This presentation provides a step-by-step example. The load attributable to gray infrastructure is associated with the total pervious load in the MS4. And this is where we begin. For the purposes of this example, the MS4 has 60,000 acres of pervious area, also known as turf. To find the pervious load, we multiply the unit load, or the loading rate of pounds per acre per year, by the number of acres. These unit loads are taken from Table 4 of the accounting guidance. So for nitrogen, it would be 13.43 multiplied by 60,000 acres to equal 806,000 pounds per acre per year. Now that we know that the total pervious load is 806,000, we come to the expert panel assumptions. The total dry weather load is 20% of the pervious load. So 20% of 806,000 is 161,000. The load attributable to gray infrastructure is 20% of the dry weather load. So 20% of 161,000 is 32,200. This is over a 10-year period because the expert panel limited the lifespan of these credits to 10 years. They expire in the model as well as in the impervious acre restoration tally. In order to continue receiving credit after 10 years, new nutrient discharges must be found and eliminated. The expert panel created this limit because gray infrastructure will continue to deteriorate as time goes by, so that a reduction in one point of the system may ultimately be negated by a new discharge. Permit terms are 5 years, not 10, so the maximum load reduction credit in a permit term is cut in half. You'll notice that the maximum sediment load is 0. This is because the expert panel report determined there was a lack of data, and the data that were available showed generally low concentrations. For simplicity's sake, we condensed all of those steps, including the multiplication for the percentages, into a single equation found in the accounting guidance. The maximum load reduction in a 5-year term is the statewide turf unit load times pervious acres in the MS4 jurisdiction times 0.02. The final step to this process is converting the maximum loads into a single EIA maximum credit. The impervious forest delta conversion equation that is used for other alternative BMPs applies here. The numerator here is labeled a bit differently because it represents the maximum load reduction rather than the achieved load reduction. These TNTP load reductions are inserted as the numerator, and the impervious forest delta of 18.08 and 2.23 are standard values in the alternative BMP conversion equation. In the unhighlighted row of the table, you will notice the separate EIAs for each pollutant. This just demonstrates the intermediate step within the equation. For example, 16,100 divided by 18.08 is 891. It is still division by 3 because the equation reflects a weighted average that represents how effective any single BMP is at reducing pollutants. The EIA reflects this BMP's lack of impact on sediment reductions. The expert panel allows reductions for 8 types of discharges and details 3 protocols to be used to calculate the reductions. The expert panel also specifies monitoring and verification requirements for each. Once you calculate your TN and TP reductions using these protocols, use the impervious forest delta EIA equation to determine the equivalent impervious acre restoration achieved. The accounting guidance details several qualifying conditions. Prior to the date when individual discharges could be reported in the model, the expert panel provided an opportunity to claim nutrient reductions achieved through an advanced program. This was to provide jurisdictions some time to ramp up the data collection that would be required to report individual discharges. The program credit is no longer available. However, MDE has established that meeting the advanced program criteria as defined by the expert panel is a precondition for receiving credit for individual discharges. This ensures that reductions cannot be claimed by meeting the basic IDDE permit requirements. The elimination of discharges found from outfall screenings and visual surveys, and those resulting from investigations initiated after a citizen complaint, are eligible. Reported discharges that are unexpected and require emergency repairs, such as pipe breaks, cannot be claimed. The corrective measures cannot be required under another regulatory mandate, and the expert panel protocols must be followed. The expert panel recommended a minimum set of data that should be reported to the regulatory authority to receive credit. MDE based the reporting requirements on those recommendations. The upcoming revision of the geodatabase will allow these discharges to be reported and credited as an alternative BMP. Now, before I hand it over to Shannon to discuss land cover conversions, I'd like to pause here for any questions.
Hi, Christina. Very good. We do have a couple of questions for you. Let's start with the IDDE. For inlet cleaning, what is the evidence needed for identifying the percent organic versus inorganic? Would visual estimations be sufficient?
Visual estimates are sufficient. The accounting guidance discusses that a process needs to be in place in order to, procedures need to be in place in order to come up with a best estimate.
Okay, great. And staying on IDDE, can you explain why the IDDE credit is cut in half for the 10-year credit? It's a cumulative credit with a 10-year cap. This calculation makes it appear that you'll only get half the credit in any given permit term.
For the credits that you can receive in, let's say, the next 5-year permit term, that permit term is 5 years. You would receive credits up until half of that maximum EIA. And then the next permit term, those credits don't expire, so it's cumulative. So you would continue to receive credit for additional illicit discharges eliminated. It's just we cut it in half for the sake of the permit term.
Okay, great. And for anybody, I think that was a good answer, but if you have further questions on these, please follow up with us after this presentation. We're going to try to stay on time today. Christina, I am going to quickly give you two more questions, though. This one's on stream restoration, and some people are concerned that any changes to stream restoration crediting could have an impact on the portfolios, the MEP portfolios that they've already calculated. So what is, I guess, what is Maryland contemplating regarding the floodplain protocol crediting?
We are still in the beginning stages of the looking into the floodplain treatment volume. That will be released by final determination. So we will let you know as soon as we do our own scientific review of the literature. We did not feel that the literature in the expert panel was substantial enough to go with that particular maximum volume.
Okay, thank you. And then one on septic pumping. Can you explain the note for septic pumping in Table 15? Does this apply to the comprehensive program to claim credits without an annual pump out? I am assuming that actual pump outs do not require this verification.
I would need to go back and take a look at that particular table, so that can be something that I'll get back to you in the Q&A afterwards.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Christina. Seeing no further questions, Shannon, if you want to go ahead and put your presentation up. I would like to let everybody know that we are going to take a 5-minute break after Shannon's presentation. And Shannon, I can see your presentation.
All right, thanks, Ren. And thanks, Christina, for the introduction earlier.
Shannon, it is not full screen, though.
Oh, you are correct.
Yep, we're seeing your note. Yep, you got it.
Thanks. Once again, I'm Shannon McHenrick from the Integrated Water Planning Program at MDE. And the next few slides, I'll discuss land cover conversion BMPs. In today's presentation, I'll be walking through the land cover conversion section of the 2020 accounting guidance, beginning with an overview of land cover conversion BMPs. I will then talk about non-riparian land cover conversion, or the base land cover conversion credit. I'll present the enhanced credit available for riparian land cover conversions. I'll then discuss a new BMP that MD has added in the 2020 guidance, forest conservation. And lastly, we'll touch on another new BMP, urban soil restoration. While not a land cover conversion BMP, it's associated with them and is included in the section in the accounting document. First, a brief overview of the land cover conversion BMPs. Land cover conversion BMPs are not new to the accounting guidance. However, we have refined the categories of land cover conversions that are available for credit and introduced a number of additional credits for other types of conversions depending on proximity to a stream. Included under the broad category of conversion BMPs are non-riparian land cover conversions, those occurring outside 100 feet of a water body, riparian land cover conversions, practices occurring within 100 feet of a water body, and lastly, a new BMP, forest conservation. The nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment reductions for land cover conversion BMPs are calculated as the difference between the pre-existing land cover unit load and the post-conversion land cover unit load. In equation 16, shown earlier by Sophia, those nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment reductions are used in the numerator of the EIA calculation. As mentioned earlier today, the way equivalent impervious acre credit for land cover conversion BMPs is calculated is unique, and it differs from the other alternative BMPs. The EIAs for land cover conversion BMPs are calculated using an ST 1-inch delta, again shown in equation 16. And recall that the ST 1-inch delta represents the reduction efficiency of a stormwater treatment facility treating 1 inch of rainfall applied to the impervious surface unit load. An ST 1-inch delta is used because land cover conversions more closely resemble upland BMPs, and using this delta makes them more comparable. I'll start off talking about the non-riparian land cover conversion BMPs, and these are those that occur outside of the riparian zone. The nutrient and sediment reductions and equivalent impervious acre credits are from Table 9 in the accounting document, and they're shown here and also on page 15 of the guidance. There are 5 different BMPs, and they represent a variety of practices. Starting with forest planting, this is the conversion of turf to forested land cover. Conservation landscaping is the conversion of turf to an unmanaged meadow, and in this case, we're using the mixed open land cover to calculate the credit. Impervious surface reduction is the removal of impervious surface to turf. Street trees is any planting occurring over an impervious surface, any tree planting occurring over an impervious surface, such as those in a sidewalk box. Note for this one that we are using an impervious road unit load as the pre-conversion unit load to calculate credit for this practice, and this is done to ensure a positive credit. And lastly, on this chart is the urban tree canopy planting credit, which is the conversion of turf to tree canopy over turf. Note that these land cover conversions can be combined for additive credit. So if a jurisdiction is undertaking a project to convert impervious surface to canopy over turf, the credit available for that project would equal the impervious surface reduction credit plus the urban tree canopy credit. In other words, the practice would be receiving credit for the conversion of impervious to turf, and then the conversion of that turf to tree canopy over turf. There are also 2 BMPs that are eligible for enhanced EIA credit if they occur within 100 feet of a perennial stream. The 2 riparian land cover conversion BMPs that are eligible for credit are riparian forest buffers, which are forest planting that occurs within the riparian zone with a minimum buffer width of 35 feet, and riparian conservation landscaping, which is the conversion of a managed turf condition that includes fertilizer and mowing to an unmanaged, unfertilized, and unmowed meadow within the riparian zone. Riparian land cover conversion BMPs receive credit equal to the reductions achieved through the conversion of land cover, that base land cover conversion, as well as an additional credit for the upland treatment realized by the new riparian land cover. I'll next take a look at how that enhanced credit is calculated. The tables presented on this slide should help illustrate how the enhanced EIA credit for riparian land cover conversion BMPs is calculated. This first table shows the base credit available for non-riparian forest planting and conservation landscaping land cover conversion BMPs. Recall that these are the same values presented earlier and in Table 9 of the accounting document. The nutrient and sediment reductions shown in this first table are those associated with the conversion of land cover, regardless of the project's proximity to a water body. However, if our forest planting or conservation landscaping project is within the riparian zone, the resulting land cover has an associated upland treatment efficiency. CVP defines these efficiencies for buffer projects, and we apply it to an urban land cover unit load to calculate an additional reduction from upland treatment, which is shown here in the second table. As a result, the riparian land cover conversion BMPs receive what we are referring to as an enhanced credit, which is equal to the credit calculated from the conversion, this first table, plus the additional credit for upland treatment, the second table. For example, forest planting receives an EIA of 1.1 per acre planted, plus an additional EIA of 0.41 for upland treatment. Add those two together and round them down, and you receive 1.5 EIA per acre of forest buffer planted, provided it's in the riparian zone. The enhanced credit nutrient and sediment reductions and EIA per acre of conversion are presented in Table 11 of the accounting document on page 16. Lastly, new in the 2020 guidance is a credit for forest conservation. Jurisdictions are eligible for forest conversion credit on acres of existing forest that are preserved in order to limit development and that go above and beyond the conservation programs that we incorporated into the Phase 3 WIP. The Phase 3 WIP 2025 scenario uses the Maryland Policy Land Policy BMP scenario, which aside from being a mouthful, includes assumptions about the continued conservation of forests due to state policies such as the Forest Conservation Act and other state preservation programs. Forest conservation easements that are eligible for credit are those that are not part of the easements for state required mitigation. They cannot be reported under state programs that are incorporated into the WIP scenario, which are shown here and also in Table 12 of the accounting document on page 18. They can also not be part of a sheet flow to conservation area or land use conversion BMP. The nutrient and sediment reductions associated with forest conservation are calculated as the difference between a total urban, which includes impervious and turf unit load, and a forested unit load. The reduction is intended to be representative of the forest conservation practice preventing development of a forested land cover to an urban land cover. The nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment reductions are presented here and in Table 13 of the accounting guidance on page 18. In addition, jurisdictions should be aware that they will be required to submit documentation of the easement they're seeking credit for, as well as those that are required by the Forest Conservation Act. For example, if a jurisdiction is required by state mitigation policies to take an easement of 5 acres to address development, and they create one that is 10 acres per county policy, they should delineate the portion required by state law and the portion that is an additionality so that a reviewer may differentiate between the two. There should also be documentation of triannual inspections to ensure compliance with easement requirements. Finally, the last BMP that I'll be talking about under this umbrella is the urban soil restoration. This BMP is intended to enhance the porosity of soils compacted by human activity in urban areas. This is a new BMP developed based on recent academic research, and as such, the credit is only applicable for MS4 permit requirements and towards local TMDL goals at this time. Soil restoration is often used in conjunction with another BMP, and is often also required to successfully implement land cover BMPs. For example, planting trees on turf often requires some level of soil ripping or restoration to ensure survival of transplanted tree material. In these cases, the application of soil restoration is considered part of that practice and is not eligible for credit. However, if soil restoration is not part of the original practice design or goes well above and beyond the requirements of the practice, then soil restoration credit would be available. It may also be used as a standalone restoration technique to reduce runoff. The credit available here is based on the depth of soil excavation and is shown in Table 14 on page 19 of the accounting document. Level 1 is used where compaction is moderate and those soils are ripped to a depth of 15 inches. And level 2 is used where compaction is severe, where a more permeable soil profile is desired. For level 2 credit, soils are excavated to a depth of 20 inches. And with that, I'll take any questions you have for me.
Okay, Shannon, good job. We do have a couple of questions for you. The first one is there a difference in turf definition or crediting when trees are planted in an agricultural field within 100 feet of a stream. For example, would it be credited as ag field conversion or as a turf conversion?
If the underlying land use is turf and it's not an actively producing ag field, there shouldn't be any difference in the available credit. However, I will say that in the accounting document, we only have credit provided for a conversion from turf or some of these urban land uses to canopy over turf. And if you were trying to receive credit for converting an ag land use, while the calculation would be similar, it's not, we'd have to look into that and get back to you.
Okay, great. And then another one on reforestation regarding the 1 acre minimum. This means that any reforestation smaller than 1 acre will be credited as tree canopy over turf, even when the ground cover will be managed as forest floor, and the land will have the water quality functions of a forest. This will make many reforestation projects less effective, including expanding existing forest and riparian buffers by planting along the forest edge or creating small reforestations within developed areas with fragmented cover.
I would be interested in hearing more on this topic. I know that both CBP and DNR qualify a forest as 1 acre of contiguous cover, which is why we went with 1 acre as well. And I think that is the sort of threshold for where they're assuming that a forest is functioning hydraulically as a forest cover. But we'd be interested in, hearing any feedback on that. If you've got any, we'll follow up on that as well.
Okay, we will be following up on all these in frequently asked questions. We have some comments that say some of the documentation required for forest conservation is confusing, and conservation landscaping. Meadows require typically at least annual mowing to keep trees from volunteering. So these are all things that we can provide further clarification on in the FAQ documents. And of course, you can contact anyone on our staff, and Shannon probably is the most versed here in the reforestation. So please feel free to reach out to us individually after these presentations as well. We're going to now take a 5-minute break, and my clock is showing 2 minutes after 2. So we'll come back at 8 minutes after 2 for Michelle Crawford and nutrient trading. Okay, thanks everybody. Okay, welcome back, everybody. My clock is showing 2:08, so we're going to begin the rest of the training sessions. Michelle, I can see your presentation. Go ahead when you get a chance.
Okay, great. Welcome back, everyone. Hi, my name is Michelle Crawford with the SSDS program, and I'm going to explain the guidelines on nutrient credit trading outlined in the new accounting guidance. The credit trading program was established in COMAR, and those rules are the framework for trading. The accounting guidance builds on that and provides additional instructions and guidelines. You can find information on the basics of how to generate credits and how to trade them on the state's Water Quality Trading Program website listed here. The website includes frequently asked questions, a link to the registry where credits are registered and posted for the public to see, and a link to the marketplace where you can publicly trade those credits with other partners. And it also links you to the map, the GIS interactive segment shed map, where you can see who your potential trading partners are based on your watershed boundaries and your political boundaries. And if you have any further questions, it also links you to the liaison with MDE's Water Quality Trading Program. So phase 1 permittees are able to accomplish restoration through nutrient credits. The accounting guidance provides formulas for how to calculate the number of credits you need to acquire for the impervious acres you wish to restore, shown here and also listed on page 33 of the guidance. There are 3 different types of pollutant credits in Maryland, and you'll need a combination of these 3 to equal 1 impervious acre treated. To calculate the number of credits you'll need for each pollutant, you multiply the impervious acres by the delta factor on the right. That represents the pollution reduction estimated by the phase 6 Bay model. So 18.08, 2.23, and 8,046. In other words, as other presenters have explained, 1 impervious acre restored reduces pollution by about 18 pounds of nitrogen, 2 pounds of phosphorus, and about 8,000 pounds of sediment. And then you multiply that by the EOS to EOT conversion factor. So what is that? The edge of stream to edge of tide conversion factor adjusts the restoration credit given to take into account pollution retention in local waters. In other words, when a pound of nitrogen is released in the western part of the state, not all of that will reach the main stem of the Chesapeake Bay. So simply based on geography, there's a greater bay pollution reduction by BMPs that are installed in the eastern part of the state. And that's reflected in this conversion factor. There's a different factor here in this table for each jurisdiction based on its geography and based on the specific pollutant. So you'll see, just as an example, Anne Arundel County has higher numbers than Carroll County here because it has more shoreline on the bay compared to Carroll County. So remembering that 1 pound of pollution is equal to 1 tradable credit, there are 2 options for applying credit trading to restoration. You can acquire the credits you need for each of the 3 pollutants, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment credits, or you can acquire in excess of 1 or 2 of the types of pollutant credits in lieu of the others, using this ratio shown here at the bottom of this page. And that's also found in the text explanation on pages 32 and 33 of the accounting guidance. So for example, if you want to restore 1 impervious acre using the first option, acquiring a mix of all 3 types of credits, you should multiply 1 impervious acre by each of the pollution reduction factors, the pollution reduction estimates shown here, 18.08, 2.23, and 8,046. And then multiply those by each of the edge of tide adjustment factors from table 21 for your specific county and for the type of pollutant. So here, using 1 county as an example, you would need to acquire 17 nitrogen credits, 2 phosphorus credits, and roughly 600,000 credits of sediment. And all three of these types of credits gathered together restore 1 impervious acre. So that's the first option. Under the second option, let's say, for example, you'd like to restore 1 impervious acre using only nitrogen credits. That's possible by multiplying 1 acre by the nitrogen pollution reduction factor at 18.08, and then multiplying that by the edge of tide adjustment factor for nitrogen for your jurisdiction, and then simply multiplying that by 3 to acquire the equivalent number of credits for the 3 different types of pollutants. Since, as we know, as shown at the top of this page, 18 pounds of nitrogen is equivalent to 2 pounds of phosphorus and about 8,000 sediment pounds. So you would acquire 54 credits of nitrogen under the second option, again, to restore 1 impervious acre. 54 credits of nitrogen sounds like the obvious choice when you think about those thousands of sediment credits in the first option, but that would really depend on the price of these 3 different types of credits at the time that you're acquiring them. And that's not set by MDE, that's determined by the marketplace. So I want to highlight some additional restrictions in the accounting guidance for restoration beyond what's built into the trading program under COMAR. So first, the credits must be owned by the permittee in the year the permit expires to count toward restoration. And this is important to keep in mind since credits are generated annually and are assigned a vintage year in the trading program. So what we call the credit vintage must match the year of the permit expiration. You'll need a memorandum of understanding or some other legal document that describes who owns the credits and who's responsible for maintenance of the BMP. We encourage partnerships, but credits cannot be used for restoration if they're generated by a stormwater BMP installed in your jurisdiction. If it's a practice described in the guidance and installed within your county, the restoration credit should be calculated using the accounting guidance and not through the credit trading program. And we recommend for those kinds of partnerships to create an MOU instead. This includes urban stormwater BMPs that are installed on other land uses, such as tree planting installed on farmland. And that's a very specific example because this was a question that we received. And we added language to the accounting guidance to clarify this kind of scenario. And finally, you have the option to generate credits from new stormwater BMPs that you install and sell those credits after your restoration requirement is complete. So those are the major points of credit trading in the accounting guidance. And at this time, we can open the floor for questions.
Okay, great, Michelle. Thank you. We do have a couple of questions, and we do trading. We coordinate it with IWIP. So, Michelle, if need be, we can let Shannon or Sophia jump in and help out with these as well. The first one is, do we apply the same edge of stream, edge of tide factor jurisdiction wide? They can range dramatically within a jurisdiction. For example, Baltimore County ranges from 0 to 100.
That's a really good question. That sounds like maybe I would be better able to answer that. Would Shannon be able to add to that?
Sure. As far as I understand, it is applied jurisdiction-wide. So we came up with a EOS EOT factor that is an average across each jurisdiction, and that would be applied. This essentially keeps you from having to recalculate each and every time for each individual practice. But EOS EOT delivery factors are available also in the back of the accounting document that are Land River segment specific. But as far as I understand, for trading, it is a little bit more, is a little less specific requirement there to make things a little easier on everybody involved.
Okay, great. The next question is regarding the vintage year. How do you address the issue of vintage year when the permit ends at the end of a year And the DMRs, the monitoring reports, are not ready until January of the next year.
That's another really good question that I think would probably be best answered by our water quality trading program liaison, since it's a little bit out of the shop of the MS4 world. And it sounds like DMRs, you're asking about DMRs that are associated with wastewater treatment plants, if I understand that correctly. So that might be kind of a bigger picture question that should be directed to the trading liaison.
That is correct. And in the past, the way in which we've dealt with this is you should have a good understanding of the credits that are available in the same year that you need it for your MS4 permit. And I believe that we asked for a good faith calculation from you all on that, because it becomes an EPA process of submitting the DMRs. And the requester was correct. It takes a while or it's an EPA process that you send them up officially, and it's after the first of the year.
And Eric Michelson adds, the vintage clause seems to disincentivize the purchase of credits before the end of the permit. And that's a good point. There, that is a strict rule that we want the credits to be held in the year that the permit expires. And then so that's really up to the permittee, when you want to acquire that, when that timing works best for your overall restoration strategy.
Okay, so we've got 2 or 3 more comments or questions on the vintage year and the weighted factors. So we'll put these into the frequently asked questions, the fact sheet, and we'll try to provide greater clarification on these. And if not, again, we'll be here to continue the dialogue until we get the right answer for y'all. Next up, I believe, is going to be Stu Comstock to talk about co-benefits. So Stu, when you get a chance, if you want to put your presentation up. Okay, Stu, I can see your presentation.
Thank you, Ray. We're going to shift gears here slightly away from alternative BMPs and trading and start talking about what else has changed in this idea of incentivizing stormwater management co-benefits. There are 3 ways listed in the accounting guidance document to obtain additional credit using upland BMPs. One of these is not necessarily new. That's the first one, which is where you can provide additional water quality treatment for rainfall depths above 1 inch in a practice that follows the criteria in the design manual. Again, this is not a new credit. However, we have changed the terminology from water quality volume to water quality treatment, just because this is unique to the accounting guidance. The second method for obtaining extra credit for co-benefits is those practices that provide extra storage above a treated rainfall of 1 inch, where that storage may not traditionally be considered water quality treatment. Those practices that include extended detention as designed according to Appendix D11 of the design manual, whether it's 12-hour in a Use 3 watershed or 24-hour in other watersheds, they can also obtain additional impervious acre credits using these co-benefits. And finally, I'm sure we've all heard a lot about green stormwater infrastructure and the benefits that it plays in our watersheds. And we wanted to recognize that as an additional co-benefit that applies to your water quality treatment goals for these BMPs that qualify for that credit. So this is a review. Credit for additional water quality treatment. The impervious area credit is based on watershed imperviousness and depth of rainfall treated, and is 1-to-1 or 100% when you treat a rainfall of 1 inch. There is a 1-to-1 relationship between the rainfall depth and acres treated up to that rainfall depth or WQT of 1 inch. However, it is quite conceivable that best management practices may be designed to treat more than 1 inch of rainfall. However, we have to recognize that when you treat more than 1 inch of rainfall, the pollutant removal efficiencies of these BMPs oftentimes is much less than that when it's between 0 and 1 inch. So when the water quality treatment is greater than 1 inch, but less than 3 inches, the ratio of rainfall depth and impervious acres treated decreases to 0.25 to 1, or you get 1/4 of an acre for every inch above 1 inch of treatment that you provide in water quality. The reason for this change, and this is the Chesapeake Bay adjuster curve for total phosphorus, is that the slopes of the lines from 1 inch to 3 inches is much less than the slope of the line from 0 to 1 inch, right? It's about 1/4 less, and therefore you get 1/4 of an acre for every inch of rainfall as opposed to 1 acre for every inch of rainfall. Equation 9, shown on page 27 of the accounting guidance, shows how this credit may be calculated. Again, this is nothing new. We've just tried to make it a little clearer. So your water quality treatment credit is the 1 inch you have to have for initially, plus your rainfall depth treated above 1 inch minus that 1 inch times 1/4 of an acre, and that's your impervious acre credit. So for example, I have a permanent pool here of 1 inch. I also have extended detention storage equal to 1 inch. Please note that because the permanent pool is 1 inch and the extended detention storage is 1 inch, this is a 50%, 50%. That additional 1 inch of storage may be considered as part of the water quality treatment. So in this case, the water quality treatment credit would be the 1 inch treated by the permanent pool plus the 2 inches total, 1 plus 1 equals 2, minus the 1 inch treated in the permanent pool times the 1/4 acre, which would equal 1.25 times my impervious acres. So if I had 10 impervious acres in the watershed, I would receive 12.5 acres of impervious credit for this practice. Now, we also recognize that BMPs may be designed to provide multiple functions, and one of those might be flood control, and there might be additional storage above the water quality treatment that is providing some form of flood storage, but may not meet the 12-hour or 24-hour extended detention criteria. However, these upland BMPs with additional storage are more resilient to changing weather patterns. And so we do want to give you additional credit when extended detention is used to release additional rainfall. The credits are available for temporary storage volume for rainfall depths between 1 and 3 inches. And again, it's at that same ratio of 0.25 to 1. Now, I know this sounds a lot like the water quality treatment volume we just discussed, but hang in there. Like the water quality treatment volume, the watershed management credit is calculated the same way. It's the rainfall treated minus the water quality treatment times 1/4 over an inch. Let's see how it's different. In this example, I have a permanent pool that's equal to 1 inch. I have additional storage in this practice up to 2 inches. However, my ED storage for water quality treatment must be no more than the same as my permanent pool. In other words, it has to be a 50-50 split. So if my permanent pool is 1 inch and my ED storage is 1 inch, any additional volume above that for extended detention would now be considered my watershed management credit. So in this example, my water quality treatment credit is still 1.25 acres. We calculated that earlier. However, because I have this additional inch, I can multiply that by 1/4 as well. So my total credit is the water quality treatment credit plus the watershed management credit, which is now 1.5 times the impervious acreage. So in this case, if I had 10 impervious acres in the watershed, I would have an impervious acre credit of 15 acres for this practice. Okay, so the third code benefit we have listed in the accounting guidance is for credit for green stormwater infrastructure. Upland BMPs that provide water quality treatment and incorporate natural processes are eligible for the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Credit. These features mimic the pollutant load reduction efficiencies of runoff reduction practices in the Chesapeake Bay program curves. As I'm about to show you, runoff reduction practices are about 35% more effective at removing TN, TP, and TSS than their stormwater treatment counterparts, and therefore, green stormwater infrastructure practices achieve a credit equal to 1.35 or 35% more than the impervious acre credit achieved through just straight water quality treatment. Please note all Chapter 5 best management practices, ESD, designed according to the manual, receive the GSI credit. Additionally, there is a subset of Chapter 3 practices with additional design features that may also be considered as green stormwater infrastructure. These additional features are oftentimes, in many cases, the recommendations found in the design manual for these various practices. So where did we come up with this 35%? Again, here's this Chesapeake Bay program adjuster curve for total phosphorus. And as you can see, the difference between the runoff reduction and the stormwater treatment practices. On average, when you look at all three curves, this is about 35% difference. And so we're going to give you that additional 35% impervious acre credit. In the 2014 guidance, there was no such credit given whether you're using a runoff reduction or stormwater treatment practice. So, as I mentioned, all Chapter 5 practices are considered ESD and therefore are also considered runoff reduction. Several of the Chapter 3 structural practices, the ones listed up here, most of the ponds and wetlands, may be considered green stormwater infrastructure with additional bells and whistles. Please note, infiltration trenches, infiltration basins, surface sand filters, organic filters, pocket sand filters, and, oh yes, bioretention is on the list, may also be considered green stormwater infrastructure if the recommendations in the manual, and I'm about to list them again, are followed. Bioretention from Chapter 3 has fewer requirements than the microbioretention from Chapter 5, and that is why it is on this list. Please note, if your practice is located under pavement, or is an underground practice, or is encased in concrete and does not mimic natural processes, it's not going to be eligible for the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Credit. Okay. This may be a little hard to read, but these are from Table 20 on page 30 of the accounting guides. These are the required or recommended features that must be added to wet stormwater ponds and wetlands for them to be considered green stormwater management infrastructure. Most of these are the recommendations that were placed in the manual in 2000 when it was adopted. Now we're saying if you do these, we will give you extra credit. Also from Table 20 on page 30 are the required elements and the recommended elements for stormwater infiltration and filtering systems to be required or to be considered green stormwater infrastructure. Please note that these features are mostly related to the type of vegetation that is being established in the facility and the amount of vegetation that is being established in the facility. Much of this guidance comes from the Vegetation and Stormwater Best Management Practices guidance published by MDE back in November of 2019. Again, many of these things are recommendations in the 2000 manual. So the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Credit only applies to the water quality treatment portion of any credits previously calculated. And it is 1.35 times the calculation of the water quality treatment credit. So in this example, I've got a wet pond. It's got a permanent pool equal to 1 inch and ESD storage equal to 1 inch. So I have 2 inches of water quality treatment. But the whole facility has been designed as green stormwater infrastructure. The water quality treatment credit is 1.25 times the impervious acreage. However, because this is now considered as green stormwater infrastructure, we are going to multiply that by 1.35, And so the new impervious acre credit for this facility is 1.69. So if there were 10 impervious acres draining to this facility, it would now have an impervious acre credit of just under 17 acres. Okay, it is completely acceptable to combine these credits. Obviously, upland BMPs may include additional water quality treatment. They could have additional storage volume, and all or parts of the facility could be considered green stormwater infrastructure. If the GSI credit is applicable, it replaces the water quality treatment credit. As we've just seen, you would multiply the water quality treatment credit by 1.35. If the upland BMP can claim the watershed management credit and the green stormwater infrastructure credit, the watershed management credit above the water quality treatment volume is added to the GSI credit for the total credit for the project. And again, just as a reminder, for water quality practices with extended detention, 50% of the total water quality volume provided can be in the form of extended detention. So if I had up to a total PE of 3 inches, so how would I get 3 inches? The wet pool would have to be designed to capture or have a PE of 1.5 inches, and the extended detention volume then could be an additional 1.5 inches. However, if my wet pool has a PE, of 1 inch, then the maximum water quality treatment credit I could claim would then be 2 inches. Here's an example where I've calculated a combination of the credits. I've got a permanent pool, an ESD storage, and my flood storage, and the whole thing's designed as green stormwater infrastructure. So I calculate my water quality treatment credit first, which is the 1.69 times my impervious acreage. Then I add my watershed management credit to that, which is an additional 1/4 acre. My total impervious acre credit for this is 1.94. So a facility with 10 impervious acres draining to it under these conditions would get almost twice the amount of impervious acre credits as originally provided. Now, we're going to get a little more complicated, and I apologize. There are a number of older upland BMPs that provide water quality for 1/2 inch of rainfall, the old first flush rule. And many of these have been retrofitted to provide treatment for 1 inch. If there's no green stormwater infrastructure credit, the pre-conversion volume, the 1/2 inch, is subtracted from the water quality treatment credit to get your new credit. So in this case, 1 inch minus 1/2 inch would equals 1/2 inch. If there is a green stormwater infrastructure credit that is applicable, that factor would be applied to the portion of the facility that meets the GSI criteria, and then you would subtract out the pre-conversion volume. So for example, if the entire facility was modified for green stormwater infrastructure, your previous area credit would be the GSI times your water quality treatment minus your pre-conversion. So I'd have 1.35 times 1 inch minus the 1/2 inch, which would equal 0.85 acres. However, if only the new part of the facility had been modified for green stormwater infrastructure, the green stormwater infrastructure would only apply to that new part. So your credit would be the water quality treatment minus the pre-conversion, and then you would multiply that by 1.35. So your credit is noticeably less here. It's 0.68 acres. Now, before we ask any more questions, we're going to allow Nora Howard to talk, because she's going to present some more examples of this, and then we're going to hold your questions till after she's presented her section.
Thanks, Stu. Pull up my slides. Can you see my slides and hear me?
Yes, Nora, we can see your slides and we can hear you, so go ahead.
Great, thanks. Hi, my name is Nora Howard, and I'll be talking about reporting co-benefits in the geodatabase. So this is an excerpt of the proposed updates to the geodatabase schema, and it's part of what was shared during the November meetings about the larger proposed updates to the geodatabase. I've taken out the fields that are relevant to reporting co-benefits, and I'll go through those, and then go through some examples to see how data will be reported using these fields. The examples that I'll go through include BMPs that provide water quality treatment as well as some extended detention. So now going through the fields, I put the new fields in bold, so for your notice. Going through them, we have the PE addressed, which is the rainfall depth treated for water quality. The PE total storage, which is the total rainfall depth managed. This includes the rainfall depth treated for water quality, as well as any additional rainfall depth captured in extended detention. Next, we have impervious acres, which is the impervious acres in a BMP's drainage area. The PE pre-conversion, which is the PE treated by the BMP prior to a conversion. The water quality treatment impervious acre credit, which is the credit associated with the PE addressed for water quality. The watershed management impervious acre credit, the green stormwater infrastructure impervious acre credit, and the total impervious acre credit, which is the equivalent of pervious acres treated by a BMP for restoration, and it encompasses the credit from the prior 3 fields. Now going through some examples. The examples are largely from Appendix I in the accounting guidance with some additional language for explanation in this presentation. In this first example, we have a generic scenario with no co-benefit. We have a wet retention pond with a permanent pool water quality treatment volume for a rainfall depth of 1 inch. So our PE addressed is 1, and since there is no additional extended detention, the PE total storage is also 1. There are 10 impervious acres in the drainage area to the pond, so we can enter 10 in the impervious acres field, and since there's no conversion, the PE pre-conversion field is not applicable here. We use the impervious acre credit equation to find that there are 10 impervious acre credits for this project, and we will enter that in the water quality treatment impervious acre credit field. We're not using the other co-benefits, so the watershed management and GSI impervious acre credit fields are not applicable, and the total impervious acre credit will be entered as 10. In the next example, we'll use the water quality treatment co-benefit. We have a wet retention pond with a permanent pool water quality treatment volume for a rainfall depth of 2.6 inches. So the PE addressed is 2.6, and since there's no additional extended detention, the PE total storage is also 2.6. There are 10 impervious acres in the drainage area to the pond, so we enter 10 in the impervious acres field, and there's no conversion, so the PE pre-conversion field is not applicable. We use the water quality treatment co-benefit impervious acre credit equation to see that there are 14 acres of credit for this BMP, and we report that in the water quality treatment impervious acre credit field. We're not using the other co-benefits, so those 2 credit fields are not applicable, and the total impervious acre credit is 14. In the next example, we use water quality treatment and watershed management co-benefits. There's a wet extended detention pond with a permanent pool treatment volume for a rainfall depth of 1 inch and an extended detention volume for an additional 2 inches. So the rainfall depth for water quality is equal to the 1 inch permanent pool plus 1 inch of extended detention storage. So the PE addressed is 2, and the total rainfall managed is 3 inches. So the PE total storage is 3. There are 10 impervious acres in the drainage area to the pond, so we put 10 in the impervious acres field, and there's still no conversion, so the PE pre-conversion field is not applicable. We use the water quality treatment co-benefit impervious acre credit equation to find 12.5 acres of credit for water quality treatment, and we can enter that in the water quality treatment impervious acre credit field. And we use the watershed management impervious acre credit equation to find 2.5 acres of credit for watershed management, which we can enter in this field. The GSI credit is not applicable here since that is not part of the BMP. To find our total impervious acre credit, we sum the 12.5 acres for water quality treatment and the 2.5 acres for watershed management to find 15 acres for our total impervious acre credit. The next example, we use water quality treatment and green stormwater infrastructure co-benefits. There's a wet retention pond with a permanent pool treatment volume for a rainfall depth of 2.6 inches. So the PE addressed is 2.6, and since there is no additional extended detention, the PE total storage is also 2.6. There are 10 impervious acres in the drainage area to the pond, and there is no conversion, so that field is still not applicable. And now we have green stormwater infrastructure features added to meet GSI credit requirements. So we use the water quality treatment impervious acre credit equation to find 14 acres for water quality treatment. And we use that in the green stormwater infrastructure impervious acre credit equation to find 18.9 acres for GSI credit. Since the GSI credit encompasses the water quality treatment impervious acre credit, it will be the only one reported in the geodatabase. So when GSI credit is being reported, the water quality treatment impervious acre field will not be applicable. And in this scenario, we're not using watershed management either, so that field is also not applicable. And so our total impervious acre credit is the GSI credit of 18.9. In the next example, we'll use all three co-benefits. We have a wet extended detention pond with a permanent pool treatment volume for a rainfall depth of 1 inch and extended detention volume for an additional rainfall depth of 2 inches. The rainfall depth for water quality is equal to the 1 inch permanent pool plus 1 inch of ED storage, so the PE addressed is 2. The total rainfall depth managed is 3 inches, so the PE total storage is 3. There are 10 impervious acres draining to the pond, so we can enter 10 in the impervious acres field, and the PE pre-conversion field is still not applicable. And now we do have green infrastructure features added to meet GSI credit requirements. So we do use our water quality treatment impervious acre credit equation to find 12.5 acres for water quality treatment, and we use that to find our GSI credit of 16.9 acres. So we can go ahead and note that the water quality impervious acre credit field is not applicable since we're using GSI, and we can enter 16.9 in the GSI impervious acre credit field. And now we can use our watershed management impervious acre credit equation to see that we get 2.5 acres for watershed management, and we enter that in the watershed management impervious acre credit field. To find our total impervious acre credit, we will sum our 16.9 acres for GSI credit and our 2.5 acres for watershed management credit to see that we can enter 19.4 in the total impervious acre credit field. In the last example, we'll use a conversion with water quality treatment and watershed management. There's a wet extended detention pond with a permanent pool treatment volume for a rainfall depth of 0.5 inches gets converted to provide a permanent pool of 0.75 inches and an extended detention volume for an additional 2 inches. So the rainfall depth for water quality is equal to the 0.75 inch permanent pool plus 0.75 inches of extended detention storage. So the PE addressed is 1.5, and the total rainfall managed is 2.75 inches, so the PE total storage is 2.75. There are 10 impervious acres in the drainage area to the pond, so the impervious acres is 10. And now we do have a conversion. So in the PE pre-conversion field, we will enter that 0.5 of the rainfall depth treated prior to conversion. To find our water quality impervious acre credit, this credit is based on the difference between the pre-conversion credit and post-conversion credit for water quality treatment. So to find the pre-conversion credit, we will use the PE pre-conversion of 0.5 to find that there were 5 acres of water quality treatment pre-conversion, and we will use the PE addressed of 1.5 and the water quality treatment co-benefit equation to see that the post-conversion water quality treatment credit is 11.25. To find the amount of water quality treatment credit that we can now report, we subtract the 11.25 credits post-conversion minus the 5 acres of pre-conversion credit to see that we can now claim 6.25 acres of credit for this project, and that is what we will enter in the water quality treatment impervious acre credit field. We use the watershed management impervious acre credit equation to find that we can also claim 3 acres of credit for watershed management, and we enter that in the watershed management impervious acre credit field. We're not using GSI, so that field is not applicable, and to find our total impervious acre credit, we will sum the water quality treatment that we calculated above using the subtraction, so 6.25, plus the 3 acres for watershed management to see that we can report 9.25 acres of credit in the total impervious acre credit field. And now I'll open it up for questions on the last 2 presentations.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nora. Thanks, Stu. You know, these are new credits. These code benefits, the green infrastructure and the watershed management, also known as climate change resiliency credits, giving credit for more volume. And we've had a lot of back and forth with a lot of the MS4s, and these are new credits and they're kind of hard to get your hands around. We've answered some from some local jurisdictions that have submitted the questions into us. And Carl has suggested maybe we have an independent session just on answering specific questions, and we can be open for that. And as I was talking, I think we did get a question that came in still. This explains the crediting well. The reporting may be messier. For example, a new or converted BMP may treat impervious acres with varying levels of existing treatment. So the impervious acres in the geodatabase could be the actual total acreage, but the calculations you ran through use untreated acreage.
With respect to the first part of the question, yeah, it could be messier. You know, clearly, we're talking about stormwater management practices, and nothing is ever cut or dry or, you know, as easy as ABC. But we wanted to give you guys extra credit where credit is due. So, you know, it is possible to design these things in a multiple of ways. With respect to the second part of the question, I'm not quite sure I'm following you on that.
I'll read it again. It says, so the impervious acres in the geodatabase could be actual total acreage, but the calculations you ran through use untreated acreage. This is one that I think we might, we'll provide ourselves, will be available if jurisdictions have specific questions on the code benefits crediting. You can send them in to us and we'll run the calculations. Other jurisdictions have sent them into us and run the calculations themselves, and we've kind of compared them and gone back and forth. Obviously, doing this virtually, it's kind of difficult to go through this without a whiteboard. So, okay. With that, Stu, it looks like we got about 10 minutes left. So we're going to go over some policy questions and wrap up. I can see your slide and I can hear you well.
All right, folks, we're almost there. Thank you for sticking with us. We've covered upland BMPs. We've talked about alternative BMPs. We've covered co-benefits and nutrient trading and reporting requirements. We're almost there. So, as Jennifer mentioned up front, we will cover a couple of the policy questions that you've submitted to us. One of the big questions that has been asked of us is, how will permittees modify their impervious area baselines? It's a good question. Please note, the proposed permits do not use the impervious area baseline. Restoration requirements are now going to be included as a specific number of acres in Part 4E. For example, by this date, the permittee shall commence and complete the restoration of X number of acres that have not been treated. The amount of impervious acres in your restoration requirement is being determined using the physical and financial information submitted by each permittee, and is being based on a number of information provided by you. So the restoration requirement may differ from permittee to permittee and is not dependent on the baseline. Okay. How are nutrient trades from the last permit handled in the 2020 guidance? This was a difficult issue. We were trying very hard to sever the two guidance documents to keep them distinct. We didn't want to carry over the 2014 into the 2020. So currently, nutrient credits used to meet the previous impervious surface restoration requirements would be listed as specific values and as the number of equivalent acres they replaced. For example, if a jurisdiction traded for 1,000 acres, the proposed permit would include the equivalent nutrients that jurisdiction used to replace those acres. For example, 18,000 pounds of TN, just under 3,000 pounds of TP, and about 450,000 pounds of TSS. Jurisdictions would be required to replace the trades with stormwater management practices, initiatives, or alternative control practices in accordance with the 2020 guidance. If a jurisdiction exceeded the 20% goal in the previous permit, can the extra credit acres be credited towards the next permit? If so, which accounting guidance method should be used? Yes, the extra credits may be used to meet future permit requirements. However, again, because we're syncing up the accounting guidance with the MS4 BMP and BMP implementation with the Phase 6 Chesapeake Bay watershed model, the impervious acre or equivalent pervious acres will be determined using the 2020 accounting guidance. But wait, please note, impervious acre credit for upland BMPs has not changed. And while there are changes in alternative BMPs, we hope that those changes will be reflected in each jurisdiction's physical capacity analysis that will be used to determine restoration requirements moving forward. How will the department handle the grandfathering of stream restoration projects where the permittee does not have pre-construction data? Please note that the requirement for pre-construction data comes from the 2014 Chesapeake Bay Program Report. It's not a new requirement. However, we will consider the use of the planning rate equivalent impervious area factor on a case-by-case basis for projects where site values cannot be reported. Moving forward, information and calculations required by the Chesapeake Bay Program should be used. And lastly, how will the 2020 accounting guidance reflect future updates made by the Chesapeake Bay Program? We have been advised that the 2020 accounting guidance is not a static document. In other words, once the permits are issued as final, it does not mean the document is locked down. The department may amend or revise the guidance as needed to reflect updates or changes to the various Chesapeake Bay Program expert panel reports or other vital information. In the interim, before we change the document, we will share updated information, including guidance and proper application on the department's website, and we will communicate with you about any potential changes. The nice thing here is that the document is not locked down and can be changed during the permit term. And with that, I'd like to open the floor up again for any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Stu. That was great. We got a easy one here for you. So regarding trading, it says that this approach is a huge disincentive to trading going forward because MDE is essentially saying it's willing to change the trading rules, the currency, from one permit to the next. That could be catastrophic for permittees carrying a trade into the next permit.
Well, it's a very good question. And I would like to say at this point, it is not a concern at this point because with the four larges that are currently out, it does not look as if that's going to be an issue. It looks like all the trades will have been paid off. However, we wanted to be fair, and you know, the impervious acres under the previous permit were established, had certain rules, and we felt that it was important that we made the break between the two permits with respect to this, and did not want to have to be keeping two ledgers. You know, ledger this is the 2014 accounting guidance, and this is the 2020 accounting guidance. So we determined that the best way we thought to do that would be to actually put the trades that were made in the permit and say that these trades had to be paid off. However, again, this is something that does not look like it's going to be an issue for the first round of permits that are currently out on public notice, and we can open the discussion for this moving forward.
Yeah, Eric, we understand your concern here. We do, and you know, put yourself in our shoes. We're trying to you know, sync up with the Chesapeake Bay program and the new efficiencies, and everybody wants to use them in a lot of cases. And we got this trading program going on as well. I think Stu makes a good point that for this this permit term and for the larges, it's not going to be an issue because of when the final determinations are going to be issued. But we will work with you. We'll look at the unintended consequences and we'll try to figure out a way that's fair and equitable moving forward. I don't know that in this little Q&A we're going to be able to answer or ease your concerns at this point, but we're willing to sit down and talk with you on this, maybe even have a specific session for those that want to use or are using trading more frequently, and we can hash all of this out. So thanks, Eric.
And I think, Christine, that answers some of your question as well. So what are the next steps as we face 258 here moving forward? As Jennifer mentioned and has been discussed throughout the session, we will follow up with answers to the questions posed today, any others that you send to us. Please submit any additional questions to me. You have my email address, stuartcomstock@maryland.gov. We will be sending out a frequently asked questions with the responses to the questions you asked today and any that you give to us before we send it out in early January, probably mid-January. In the interim, we hope that you have a happy, healthy holiday season. And thank you. Thank you for putting up with us for 2 hours today. We appreciate the time spent communicating with you and trying to hash this out. I would also like to personally thank everyone who helped present today. Jennifer, Ray for being our moderator, Sophia, Shannon, Nora, Christina, and Michelle for their efforts. It is truly appreciated. I thought they did a great job. Thank you. And with that, I cede the floor to Jennifer and Ray. Thank you.
I have nothing further to add, Stu. Good job today.
Thank you. Okay.
So this ends our presentation today. Everybody have a happy holiday. Stay well.